Hello, I am Professor Sims, and this video is about skin and eye infections. This is the fifth of 10 lessons included in my pathogenic microbiology course. If you are currently enrolled in this course, please consult the syllabus and Moodle site for assignments and other course information. The learning objectives for this unit are going to be learning about the major anatomical features of the skin and eyes, comparing, contrasting microbiomes of various body parts, including your hands, back, feet, eyes, other things, explaining how microorganisms overcome defenses of the skin and eyes, the signs and symptoms for infections of the skin and eyes, identifying the most common bacterial, viral, and fungal pathogens associated with skin and eye infections, and then finally identifying parasites that infect the skin and eye. The skin is a marvelous, flexible, tough membrane. It's also called the cutaneous membrane. Skin does much more than just keep the internal organs together. Your skin prevents excessive water loss. It helps to regulate body temperature via production of sweat and dilation or constriction of blood vessels. Your skin assists in the formation of vitamin D. It's involved in different sensory phenomenon. Your skin has numerous physical and chemical properties that make it a significant barrier against microbial invaders. Your skin limits infection and disease unless it has been burned or broken or cut or some other way it's been compromised. The surface of the skin is a generally dry and inhospitable environment. Your skin's covered with salt that is left behind as sweat evaporates, and sebum, an oily lipid that's secreted by your sweat glands. Chemicals in sweat and sebum are antimicrobial, which prevents the growth of many microbes. Also, the skin sloughs off, like when your dead skin sheds off, it sloughs off microbes attached to the epidermis. Normal flora of the skin compete with potential pathogens for nutrients and for space. Your normal flora produce chemicals that interfere with the growth of other microbes that also defend against infection. Here we discuss the different layers of skin. Your skin's composed of 3 different layers. The first one is the hypodermis. So your hypodermis here is the innermost layer. Then you have the dermis here, and the epidermis is the outermost layer. The deeper dermis is covered by the superficial outer dermis. The dermis is a tough, leathery structure that is composed of loosely packed cells. It has your protein fibers, small muscles, sweat glands, sebaceous glands, blood vessels, nerve endings, and hair follicles. And then, of course, the hair grows up and out through the epidermis. Some of the normal microbiota are shown here. Some yeasts and bacteria tolerate and indeed thrive in the harsh conditions of the epidermis, in the cavities of the hair follicles, and in the interiors of the seat ducts, or in the sweat glands. These normally harmless residents make up the skin microbiota. So significant members of the skin microbiota include small lipophilic yeasts such as Mycoses, which digest sebum. You also have aerobic gram-positive bacteria in the Staphylococcus genus and the Micrococcus genus. The most common species of skin-dwelling staph is your Staphylococcus epidermidis. It is so named for the fact that it is a common normal flora of the epidermis, Staphylococcus epidermidis. Diphtheroids are another common type of gram-positive bacterial microbiota of the skin. These are named for the similarity of their appearance to Corynebacterium diphthera, which causes diphtheria, but these are actually non-pathogenic. Some of the other ones here are listed, and they are divided by groups. So you have your actinobacteria, Bacteroidetes, your cyanobacteria, right, Proteobacteria. So not only are the groups or classifications of your normal microbiota listed, but they're also connecting them to where on the body they usually are, where you usually have normal microbiota of the skin. The microbiota is going to be different on different regions of the skin, mostly because of how some of your skin is more moist and some of it's more dry. Also, you should note that there's very significant variation of the skin microbiota, not only in different regions of your body, but also in different individuals. And it even can differ by what age you are, kind of hormones your body is secreting. It has a lot of different things that affect the biota of your skin. Despite the inhospitable nature and defensive structures and chemicals of the skin, and also despite the fact that you have normal flora on your skin that are helping to block the invasion of pathogens, well, pathogenic microbes can still produce diseases of the skin, particularly if they can penetrate the epidermis or when the immune system is suppressed. Bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, and arthropods, yes, insects, arthropods, are involved in skin diseases. Diseases of other body systems can also manifest themselves in the skin. Figure 21.1 is showing the raised lesions that are typical of folliculitis. I know that it looks like acne, but it's actually an inflammation of hair follicles. This here on the left. Now these ones over here are lesions that are formed due to acne. This is another inflammation of hair follicles, but in this case the inflammation is resulting from when the hair follicles are clogged with lipids, fatty acids, and dead skin cells. When your hair follicles get clogged up with these, greasy, nasty things, well, that creates a really, really yum and warmy environment for bacteria to grow. This again is acne. It's a bacterial infection of the skin. And what I want to show you here is this is actually not just a pimple. Okay, we know it as a pimple, but it more specifically is known as an abscess. An abscess is what is the term that is given to a pus-filled lesion of the skin. In fact, we have many different types of skin lesions that you should know. So we just saw the abscess. That's a localized collection of pus under the skin. Here you have what is known as a crust. A crust is dried fluids from a lesion that you can see on the surface of the skin. This is a cyst. A cyst is an encapsulated sac that's filled with fluid. It is semi-solid fluid, or it can be gas even, and it's usually located just below the epidermis. This here is a macule. A macule is a smooth spot of discoloration. And then this one here is a papule, and that is a small raised bump on the skin. And the main difference between these two is this one is more raised, this one is more flat, and this has the discoloration. So it almost looks like a little tiny bruise. This is a pustule. A pustule is a fluid or pus-filled bump, and it is going to be different from an abscess. It usually has to do with its size and its shape. An ulcer is a break in the skin, so this is an open wound in the skin. And then this is a vesicle. A vesicle is a lesion that is filled with fluid, and it's usually pretty small. And then this is a wheal. A wheal is a swollen, inflamed, often fluid-filled lesion, and it usually burns or itches. And this is very common. You see these all the time with insect bites, especially mosquito bites. This table gives a much more kind of comprehensive example of bacterial infections of the skin all in one place. So you guys know that I love my tables. I think they're very good for comparing and contrasting. We're going to go through several of these in the following slides. Let's talk about diseases of the eyes. An eye is a hollow, roughly spherical ball. It's about 2.5 centimeters in diameter. The outer wall of the eye, this is called the fibrous tunic, is composed of white sclera, which is a direct extension of the dura mater of the brain. And it has a colorless, clear cornea, which covers the front of the eye. So that's the cornea here. The fibrous tunic provides a tough barrier against the penetration of microbes. An extension of the epidermis of the skin called the conjunctiva. This lines the backside of the eyelids and all but the very center of the cornea. So that is this conjunctiva, just along the outside. It's an outside lining of the eye. Okay. The interior of the eye is composed of 2 chambers filled with fluids called humors. The back interior wall of the eye is the retina. The retina contains billions of sensory neurons that respond to light energy, and the retina sends nerve impulses to the brain down the optical cranial nerve. You do have some microbes that live on the conjunctiva of the eye, but your humors are going to be sterile. Conjunctivitis, also known as pink eye, is shown here in figure 21.8. This is inflammation of the conjunctiva, and over here you also have, you can see here, this is keratitis. This is inflammation of the cornea. A number of bacteria, fungi, viruses, and even protozoa can cause conjunctivitis or keratitis. For example, you have Haemophilus influenza. That's the most common bacteria that causes conjunctivitis. And then Acanthamoeba causes both conjunctivitis and keratitis. Some other types of conjunctivitis, you have your acute purulent conjunctivitis, acute hemorrhagic conjunctivitis, acute ulcerative blepharitis, follicular conjunctivitis, dicryocystitis, keratitis, which we just talked about, keratoconjunctivitis. So this is when you have inflammation of both the cornea and the conjunctiva, non-ulcerative blepharitis, and papillary conjunctivitis. So these last two here are not necessarily caused by any kind of microbe. It can be caused just by allergens. Staphylococcus aureus is a very, very common cause of staph infections of both the skin and the eye. And a really kind of concerning characteristic of Staphylococcus aureus is that you can have methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. That's your MRSA. One way to detect the presence of Staphylococcus aureus is to culture it from a swab taken from a patient on a mannitol salt agar plate. Mannitol salt agar can be used to distinguish your Staph aureus from other species of Staphylococcus, because Staph aureus is going to ferment the mannitol in the media, and that turns the media from this reddish color to a yellow color. This here is showing Staphylococcus aureus under an electron microscope, and it is so named for its cell morphology. The shape is coccine, and the arrangement is staphylo, and therefore it's called staphylococcine. Staph aureus is a really, it's associated with really nasty skin infections, and they can manifest as folliculitis or furuncles or carbuncles. So this figure here is showing furuncles, which are essentially boils, and then carbuncles over here, which are really gnarly, and I've seen actually much worse than this. The carbuncle, though, is a pus-filled lesion. It's usually much deeper than a boil, and if you've ever had a particularly bad staph infections, these are the ones where you have to go and get the boil drained, and it leaves such a big gaping ulcer in your skin that they usually have to stuff it with sterile dressing while it heals. Yeah. Staph aureus is the leading cause of staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome. This figure is showing a newborn that has SS, and what happens is you have really large regions of your skin that is dying and peeling off. And here you can see where this has new skin underneath, so it's probably a bit inflamed, maybe a little bit itchy. But this here, there actually wasn't new skin cells that were fully formed underneath the dead skin. So you have areas where it's going to be extremely painful, and you can also have secondary infections that form because you have flesh that's exposed. Impetigo is a contagious skin infection that's also caused by Staphylococcus. Some impetigos, though, are caused by Streptococcus, and this figure here, 2112, is showing the vesicles, pustules, and bullae that are rupturing, and they produce this crusty looking sore, and they are quite itchy and inflamed and painful, sometimes painful. You have Streptococcus pyogenes. This is causing things like cellulitis of the skin. You have erythemas. Figure 2114 is showing cellulitis here in A as a red rash. Then you have a red rash, but it's raised, and it usually has really clear borders between the skin that's infected and the skin that is not infected. And then this one here, you have lumps and nodules. And in all cases, it's causing a lot of inflammation and pain in the skin. Streptococcus pyogenes can also be the causative agent of necrotizing fasciitis. So this figure 2115 is showing a patient that has a pretty advanced case of necrotizing fasciitis, and what they've had to do, so this is the same patient, what they have to do is they have to surgically remove that skin. If you don't surgically remove the skin, you could end up losing a limb because it is actually killing the tissue, and it's preventing things like proper blood flow to the surrounding tissues. So it kind of spreads, not just because the bacterial infection is spreading, but also because as it spreads, the tissues around them are losing circulation, and then that tissue begins to die off as well. Pseudomonas aeruginosa causes wound and burn infections. It's also common in hot tub rash, ear infections. So this figure here is showing hot tub rash caused by Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Here on the left, it's a red, itchy, raised rash. And then here on the right, it's showing swimmer's ear infections caused by Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Acne, again, we talked about acne a little while ago. The species that's most commonly associated with acne is called Propionibacterium acnes. It infects hair follicles and pores that are clogged with dead skin cells and sweat. Bacillus anthracus is the causative agent of anthrax, and there's different kind of types of anthrax depending on what part of the body it's infecting. When it infects the skin, it's called cutaneous anthrax. And figure 2119 is showing cutaneous anthrax infection, and you can see that there is dead tissue that's accumulating in a nodule, and this has to do with the exotoxins that this species produces. It kills living tissue. Again, there's another table that's kind of outlining these different types of diseases and what pathogens cause them. And also what we didn't talk about yet was the antimicrobial drugs that are used to treat these infections, so you should know those as well. Bacterial conjunctivitis is caused usually by Haemophilus influenzae. It can resolve on its own in a few days. If it does not resolve on its own, then you should seek out antibiotic treatment. There are much more serious forms of conjunctivitis, and these are going to be your gonococcal, your chlamydial, your trachoma. All of these can lead to blindness if not treated. So you can get infections of the eye caused by bacterial infection that are severe enough that it can cause you to go blind. Keratitis is usually caused by Staphylococcus epidermidis, which, if you remember, is a normal flora. But it's also more commonly caused by Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which is the same one that causes, just a little while ago we saw it in swimmer's ear, the ear infections. Biofilms can make treatment of these infections much more difficult, because when pathogens live in a biofilm, they're communicating with each other, and they're physically attached to each other, and they kind of protect each other. So it becomes more difficult to treat them. Figure 2121, this is an acute bacterial conjunctivitis caused by a biofilm, and it's showing the swelling and the redness that accompanies this type of infection. This here is, so this one is your run-of-the-mill pink eye. This one is showing a gonococcal infection. So this is going to be a bit more of a severe infection. There's more discharge. There can be scarring of the cornea, and the scarring of the cornea is what eventually can cause blindness. Trachoma, again, can be a much more severe eye infection, and this figure here is actually showing where you can have your eyelashes that get turned inward, and it can again lead to blindness unless it is corrected with surgery. Because if your eyelashes start to turn inward, then what it does is it scratches the cornea. And as the cornea is getting scratched by your eyelashes, it lets even more bacteria get in, and it just kind of keeps getting worse and worse and worse until you get it corrected with surgery. Bacterial keratitis, again, this is inflammation of the cornea. It does progress rather quickly within a couple of days. and it can lead to blindness if it's not treated. These are some of the diseases we're going to talk about coming up here. Again, use these tables that the book provides to help you to keep track of all of these things. I know that it is a lot. It is a lot, but that's what these tables are for, to help you kind of keep track of what the diseases are, what their symptoms are, how they infect the body, where they infect on the body, what kind of drugs are used to treat them. So you have viral infections of the skin and eyes. This is the papillomavirus that causes your plantar warts here. This is plantar warts on the toe, and then this is a filiform wart that has started growing on an eyelid here. Those are caused by papillomaviruses. Your herpes simplex virus, especially the herpes simplex virus 1, it can appear as lesions on the skin and mucous membranes. This here is showing your typical cold sore. Rosola and fifth disease. These are also viral illnesses of the skin. They cause rashes. These are also caused by herpes viruses, and fifth disease is caused by parvovirus. So these are typical rashes that you can see. This one here, the bumps are more raised. This one here, the bumps are more flat. They both are inflamed. These are quite mild in comparison to a lot of the other ones that we have seen. Fifth disease has this distinctive rash on the face, where they call it slap cheek rash because it literally looks like somebody just slapped your baby, right? Viral conjunctivitis, again, this is going to look very similar to your bacterial conjunctivitis. It just so happens that the viral conjunctivitis is very, 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 very contagious. This is the pink eye that if your kids have it, you definitely don't want to send them to school for like a week. Also, viral conjunctivitis is distinctive because it usually causes what is known as photophobia, which is where it actually causes pain to be in a room with a lot of light. This is another keratitis that's formed from the herpes viruses, herpes simplex keratitis. We're going to look at some of the mycoses of the skin. So mycoses, these are formed by things like yeast, molds, that kind of stuff. Mycoses can be cutaneous, subcutaneous, or systemic. So that means on the epidermis, in the dermis, or in the bloodstream. A ringworm is a common cutaneous mycoses that's caused by Tinea corporis. So ringworm has kind of a misleading name. It is not actually caused by a worm or even a helminth. It is caused by Tinea corporis, as shown here. Also, you can have a ringworm that's caused by dermatophytes in any of these genera, the trichophyton, your epidermophyton, and your microsporum. Aspergillosis is a fungal disease. It's caused by Aspergillus. These cause primary cutaneous infections, and like many other skin infections, they enter through a break in the skin, a lesion, or a surgical wound. It's a really, really common nosocomial infection. You can have what is known as secondary cutaneous aspergillosis. In secondary cutaneous aspergillosis, the fungus is actually going to enter the respiratory system, and that is from inhalation of the fungal spores. The most common subcutaneous mycosis is called sporotrichosis, and we have had this before in one of the earlier lessons where we were looking at Rose Gardner's disease. So Rose Gardner's disease is called that because it was first discovered in Rose Gardners who had acquired a skin infection after they were pricked with the thorns from the rose bush. This figure here is showing Rose Gardner disease formed from a fungal infection. And this usually is limited to a skin disease, but rarely it can also affect the lungs, the joints, or the bones. It has even been known to migrate to the brain. Candida yeasts are opportunistic infections. They can cause rashes, yellowing of nails, inflammation. This can come just from skin-to-skin friction in a warm, moist area of the body. For example, the groin or under the breast, under your arms, between your toes. Candidiasis of the mouth is called thrush. In thrush, you usually see white patches on your tongue or in your throat. Parasitic skin and eye infections. So this is going to be helminths. If you have helminths that are breaching the skin barrier, you can have infections. We have here Lolo disease, acanthamoeba keratitis, your Mycoses or eyeworm. This one is going to be endemic to Africa, and it is a subcutaneous infection that is transmitted by deer flies. Let's look at acanthamoeba. They're waterborne parasites. They're very common in water that is unchlorinated. You have cysts that form and trophozoites that are capable of entering the body, causing infections of the eye, the skin, and in some cases even the central nervous system. So that in that way it can become systemic. What happens is it starts out with this characteristic stages of the life cycle of amoebas. These can enter the human body in different ways. You have this example is entering through the eyes, so that can cause keratitis of the eyes. You can have amoeba that are inhaled, and that ends up infecting the lower respiratory tract. You can have amoeba that are entering the skin through ulcers or lesions in the skin, and this is especially prevalent in immunocompromised individuals. So these are these different life stages under the electron microscope. This is the cyst, the trophozoite, and then this is an eye of a patient that was infected, the keratitis. This fluorescent color that you see, it's actually what you can observe after there's been an application of sodium fluorescein, and this image really kind of shows you the damage that's been done to the cornea and the blood vessels surrounding the cornea here. This figure is showing several different things. You have Lolo worm in the eye here, and this is a very close-up version of that worm. And then this is showing the pathogenesis and life cycle. So it starts out with a fly, and it is a fly that bites you, right? So it's taking when it says it's taking a blood meal, it means it's feeding on your blood. And then while it is doing that, this is an infected fly, and while it's doing that, it is transmitting to you this helminth, and it transmits the adult. And then the adult, essentially, it's kind of shedding its skin, or its little microfilary are making their way onto your skin, and then the fly ingests those things, and then you're ending up here with larval stages that are penetrating the fly, and then it migrates into the fly's mouth parts, the proboscis, and then it bites somebody else, and it's like it's using not just the fly, but also the things that the fly bites to reproduce. So that is going to do it for lesson 5. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to do the reading, especially those tables. Check the description below for more videos related to the topics we covered, and leave your questions for me in the comments section below.